after I graduated at a YMCA. I was assistant physical director at Norfolk YMCA. I was there for a year. I knew I was about to get drafted. My number was going to come up pretty soon, so I started thinking about joining the service. And I had a fraternity brother who was in OCS at Fort Benning, Georgia, and he had written me a letter and told me OCS was great. I should join the Army and come down. Of course, I've been looking for him ever since to tell him I went to. But anyway, I took the test, and I was guaranteed an OCS appointment based on my test scores. And I had a college degree. But they were real proud of their brother going off to the service. Of course, my dad, I think he was quite proud. He had tried to get me to go in the Navy since he'd been in the Navy. But I decided to go to the Army. And after I was in Vietnam, I wish I'd listened to him, because he always said he had 3 hot meals and a warm place to sleep. And here we were eating sea rations in the rain. When I left for Hawaii, I had orders coming out of Fort Benning. They said, you'll go from here to Hawaii and from Hawaii to Vietnam. So I had a car, so I drove from Norfolk, Virginia to San Diego, and then flew to Oahu, Hawaii, and consequently up to Schofield Barracks. And then about a month later, my car arrived, and so I was able to go around the island and visit all the touristy places. But I was basically stationed at Schofield Barracks for 18 months. But our main task was taking all the young soldiers coming in, starting in 1967 and June of '67, and getting them trained to go to Vietnam. And we spent 18 months. We were strictly training. During that time, some of the officers got bored with training, and they would join other units and go right to Vietnam because they were tired of waiting around to go. They knew they were going, they just didn't know when. So they ended up leaving our unit and going to other units to be deployed right to Vietnam right away. There in Vietnam, I was the battalion liaison officer. During the day, I would go fly around with the colonel out to each of the units and get information about what had happened that day, how many people had gotten killed or wounded, or how many enemy they had killed, how much rice they had captured, how many weapons they had captured. Take all that information and then coordinate it with our the S3 operations officers and get all that detail together, and then go fly to Chu Lai each day or each night and brief the officers at headquarters, the general officers. And so my job mainly is to gather that information and then report it out at night, report where all of our units were going to be that night, because the division fires would fire artillery around those areas for protection. So you had to know exactly where all of your companies were out in the field. And so I would take that information, all their coordinates, and present it to the division headquarters each day. So I'd either go by jeep between Duc Pho and Chu Lai, or by helicopter. And I'd always try to get back to Duc Pho by nightfall. Sometimes I was able to make it. Sometimes I'd have to find a place to stay at Chu Lai. That night, we had a number of incoming mortars, a lot of small arms, and we had one company on the stand down. So I was in a tent. There was probably 6 or 8 other officers in one large tent. And one of our concerns always was, how do you know incoming from outgoing? And the old guys used to say, don't worry, when it's incoming, you're gonna know it. And he was right. We heard it, we all scrambled out of the tent. Of course, it blew up the tent and burned everything. And there was only one actually fairly safe place over there, Tactical Operations Center. So we went in there. We called the Battalion XO called the commanding battalion commander at LZ Thunder and said, we need help down here. And he kind of laughed and chuckled and said, you guys can handle it. But he was an old World War II lieutenant colonel. And so he didn't think much of the guys back in the battalion rear, so I always thought that was pretty comical that, you know, he was saying, I forgot the exact words they used, they were pretty rough and tough, but basically saying, handle it yourself. But, you know, we blew flue gas, which lit up the whole surrounding area, so you could see anybody coming in. And it hit one of the company trains and burned everything the company had. Tet Offensive actually lasted right through September. I left Vietnam in about the middle of June, but officially I think it goes from 1 February to September sometime. During those times, there was a lot of firefights, a lot of our helicopter that I was riding in, we were shot down twice, once in April, and then again, I think it was on the 9th of June. At that time, I was planning to become RA, regular Army officer. In other words, stay in, make a career out of it. After that second time of being shot down, I began to rethink that process because officers were pulling 2 and 3 tours in Vietnam then. So I felt I was fortunate at that point to have not been wounded or shot down or killed while I was being shot down. So I decided at the last day or two that I was not going to stay in, and the battalion commander was quite upset with me. So he flew me back from Duck Pho to Chulai, out process at treetop level and landed, which probably is the scarier part of my tour over there, being you weren't supposed to fly that low, but he was quite upset with me. I joined the National Guard, Pennsylvania National Guard, as an intelligence officer. Then I was promoted to captain, and I was a company commander of an armor company with tanks. We trained at Fort Indiantown Gap up in the Pocono Mountains, mountain area. I did that until the time that I was transferred to Fort Smith, Arkansas. They had the vice president said, we're having a problem at the Fort Smith plant, an inventory problem. I'd like for you to go down there, spend time there, take care of the problem. He said, you'll only be there probably 2 years, then you'll come back. When I was in the Pennsylvania National Guard, I was called up for the trucker strike and then called up again for the flood. And I had to go in, the plant manager said, I'm going, you know, I've been called up to active duty. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know when I'll be back. And I just started the job. So that didn't go over very well, but fortunately I kept my job. So when I moved to Arkansas, I said, well, the Army Reserve was only called up for war, whereas the National Guard is called up for hurricanes, all kinds of problems. So I decided I'd join the Army Reserve. So I joined the Civil Affairs Unit in Fayetteville and trained there, trained at Fort Bragg to become Civil Affairs qualified. From Civil Affairs, I went to command a unit in Miami, Oklahoma, an ordnance unit. So I also became ordnance qualified. And our job was teaching the Bradley fighting machine. At that time, it was a version of a tank and a fighting, you would hold a squad of men. And so we would go to Fort Benning and teach the guys the maintenance, how to handle that. But also we'd go to Red River Army Depot, where they had tank repairs and Bradley repairs, and I had engineers and technicians that knew how to repair that kind of equipment. That was their job. So I did that for about 3 years. Then for a time I went to Tulsa and taught Command and General Staff College for a while. Also, the colonel sent me to the Fort Smith Training Battalion, where Bank South is now. It was an old 2-story building. That's where, and it used to be a USO there back in the 40s. So that was the building for the Fort Smith Training Battalion. And we would train it, and it was mostly drill instructors. And we would go to Fort Benning in the summer for our 2 weeks. And our guys would actually become the drill instructors and let the drill instructors, they'd take vacation during that time when our unit would come in. From that unit, I became the quartermaster battalion in Stigler, Oklahoma. So I went to Fort Lee, Virginia, became quartermaster qualified. And I had companies all over Oklahoma, and that, you know, I had 700 and some soldiers. And when we would go to town, we'd provide all the fuel, the food, the clothing. You had sewing machines in that unit, washing machines, all kinds of equipment. Basically, they supported the active reserves and active duties. From that job, I became the Deputy Chief of Staff of Logistics in Fort Smith. So I was in charge of all the logistics for Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, New Mexico, and Texas. So I would fly around to all those states for all their equipment, transportation sites, and support. We were in charge of all the equipment as well as keeping maintenance of that equipment. So that was my main job for a couple of years. Then the general said it was getting close to my retirement. He would send me back to Fort Smith, so I came back to Fort Chaffee. I was the director of personnel for the 4003rd Operation Reserve Support. I forget what I call it now, but anyway, my last job was director of personnel at Fort Chaffee. Just about every type of civilian job there is, there's probably a counterpart, something close to it in the military. So you get fantastic training, you know, it's all paid for by the government as you're being supported by your food, clothing, everything you need is supplied, housing. So you can take that and save a lot of money while you're in the service, depending on your situation, and come out with a lot of life skills and maturity, caring more for other people, learning to get along with people. A lot of the things that you're forced to in the military to get along, take care of each other, as opposed to you may not always have that teamwork kind of feeling in a civilian atmosphere. And I think those life skills and team building skills that you learn that are realistic in the military really carry over into your civilian life.